Ladies and gentlemen, what we're watching happen to the Democrat Party needs to be studied because the shocking poll we're about to get into is an absolute nightmare for Democrats. Mind you, this is coming from CNN. They even have to admit this and are now saying the midterms are basically a toss-up. And so, while Hakeem Jeffries and the rest of the Democrat Party keeps walking around pretending everything is fine, the numbers are telling a very different story. The Democrat Party is so unlikable that even the left's Trump derangement syndrome is not enough to save them. And even CNN is starting to admit Democrats are in serious trouble. As always, if you enjoy the content, smash that thumbs up button. That's the best way to let me know. Subscribe to stay locked in with all the future content. But first, let's start with Hakeem Jeffries, who is explaining how Democrats will win back the House and basically how they are the only ones standing between black voters and Jim Crow 2.0 from happening. Take a listen.
And so Susan DelBene said earlier today, we're going to win back control of the House. And the big fight will be what happens in between 2026 and 2028. Because we know this unprecedented assault on black political representation, the likes of which we have not seen since the Jim Crow era, the ghost of the Confederacy has afflicted the United States Supreme Court majority and is invading and haunting the nation right now, and we take that seriously. And we know it's going to continue, which is why Democrats are committed to launching a decisive and overwhelming response in advance of the 2028 election to ensure that it's the American people who are the ones who get to decide who's in the majority in the House, who's in the majority in the Senate, and ultimately in 2028, who gets elected as the next president of the United States of America.
When you look at what the left does, it really is quite fascinating. You got Hakeem Jeffries over here talking about Jim Crow this, ghost of Confederacy that, basically reading out of a book on how to keep black people in fear and believing they are the victim.
Republicans have concluded that they need to cheat to win. That's what they're celebrating? Is that what you're elevating right now? The notion that 4 unelected judges would overturn the votes of more than 3 million citizens in Virginia? Is this what Republicans are celebrating right now? Because the people in Virginia right now are outraged, they're angry, and they're determined to send a message in November, regardless of what ultimately happens before the Supreme Court of the United States of America, where that reckless decision by the Virginia Supreme Court is now on appeal.
So now, because the left doesn't like the way things are going with the Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court is now reckless and Republicans are cheating. I mean, isn't that rich? Which I find incredibly fascinating coming from Hakeem Jeffries, who is cheering on Virginia as they use every backhanded trick in the book to try and redraw their maps. And it worked until the Virginia Supreme Court stepped in and said, nah, you can't do that. Hakeem Jeffries, who was literally celebrating and poking his chest out, thinking that Democrats had pulled it off, had the rug pulled from underneath him, and even CNN had to admit that it's not looking good for Democrats right now. Take a look.
But I think this poll serves as a big-time reality check for Democrats, and that is, it ain't over yet, especially with the redistricting when we look ahead to the 2026 race for Congress. You would have thought that the Democrats' lead would expand on the generic congressional ballot. It didn't happen. Look, in March, Democrats were up by 6 points. Look at this now. Democrats are up by 3 points, and I want you to note the yellow lettering. No clear leader. It is within the margin of error. So despite all of the talk about Donald Trump's unpopularity, the fact is Republicans very much remain in the game when it comes to the congressional midterms, which are occurring in what, 6 or 7 months at this point?
Yeah. Even if you want to say, well, Republicans are not winning, it's simply a toss-up, that's not good. Because let's be real. Look at everything going on right now in the country that the left blames Trump for. How is it even a toss-up? Democrats are so unpopular, even Trump derangement syndrome is not enough to save them. People may not be happy with what the president is doing when it comes to Iran, but they can't stand Democrats more.
So a lead of 3 points in the generic ballot test here. Does that get the job done?
No, it might not actually get the job done. And I love any reference to airplane, I will say, and Leslie Nielsen. Look at this. Okay, take a look here. Democrats in the National House vote margin. According to my estimate, what they need for control with redistricting in terms of the national popular vote is somewhere of a win between 3 and 4 points. What's CNN's current poll with no clear leader? It's a 3-point advantage. If this were, in fact, the actual result come Election Day, the race for Congress, the race for the House, would be basically a toss-up. And that is why the redistricting efforts that have been happening are so important. Because before the redistricting happened, Democrats essentially just needed to win the National House popular vote in order to win control of the House of Representatives. But now, with the redistricting, their ladder, they have to climb ever higher, and a 3-point win may very well not do it. This is well within the realm of possibilities. Could be Democrats take back the House. You know, if Democrats outperform the CNN poll by a few points, they take it back. But they could underperform as well, and that would be big time.
Now, a lot of this is going to be decided by what happens with Iran because of the pressure it is placing on inflation and gas prices. And so that could flip everything. If this conflict ends with probably at least 90 days before the midterms, we do live in a microwave society where people tend to remember the most recent feeling or things they can point to. And so the president should want to have this conflict wrapped up before then. But the fact that with the economy not really in as good a place as it could be, and we can see things still get better, Democrats are struggling with these conditions. That's why it's really bad for them right now.
Saying, the president's approval on the economy. The president is just 30%, 70% disapproval. Those are, I think, the worst numbers he has ever had. But if his numbers are so bad, then why aren't Democrats benefiting?
Yeah, that's exactly it, Johnny B. Look, we talk about, economic approval rating for the president. We talk about the net approval rating among registered voters. If we look among registered voters, the net approval rating, he's 36 points under where to go. There's no way Republicans could possibly hold on to the House. But look at this. Which party is trusted more in the economy? It's a tie among registered voters. Just because Donald Trump is unpopular doesn't make Democrats popular. And when you match Democrats against Republicans, all of a sudden it is a dead heat.
Oftentimes Republicans enjoy an advantage on the economy, though. So tide may not be great for them, but still a huge disparity there.
That should terrify the left, because that number between now and November, I say that will change and more than likely get better. And if they are tied when basically Trump right now is at his lowest, the Iran conflict is affecting gas prices, which is affecting the economy, the question really becomes, what level of improvement will happen between now and November? Because any noticeable level of improvement basically spells disaster for the left. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, let me take you to AOC, who tends to believe she's the smartest person in the room, or at least tries to talk like she is, and she usually ends up being pretty far away from that reality. And she does not disappoint right here. Take a listen to this.
For $1 billion with the
Absolutely not.
And Congressman, just your reaction to the Virginia Supreme Court overturning the maps in Virginia for Democrats. Do you think Democrats at large are losing this redistricting battle? We just saw Missouri with favoring Republican maps.
I think I can't really comment on kind of winning or losing this larger thing. I think overall the American people are losing when it comes to the country backsliding into redistricting that is very clearly driven by racial disenfranchisement. I think we all lose when that happens. Now, when it comes to Virginia, I think what is extremely disturbing about what has happened in Virginia is less about it's one thing to talk about the maps. It's another thing that this court went in and overturned the will of 3 million Virginians. They can say whatever they want to say about their reservations on the ballot initiative, but they explicitly chose to issue this ruling after the election happened. They had all the time in the world to issue an opinion or an injunction before allowing this election to happen. So they did not overturn a map, they overturned an election.
Listen, AOC continues to prove one thing, that you do not have to be smart to work in politics. You just got to be willing to listen and say whatever someone else tells you to say, because clearly she did not read one page of the court document. if she would at least skim through it, or at least got someone competent on her staff to actually skim through it, she would have knew that they actually addressed that. And it was the Commonwealth, the state of Virginia, ran by Democrats, that did not want to allow the courts to interfere prior to voting. Check this out. On March 6, 2026, the General Assembly of Virginia submitted to Virginia voters a proposed constitutional amendment that authorizes partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts in the Commonwealth. Let's go to page 7, ladies and gentlemen. This is where it gets pretty self-explanatory. It is fair to ask whether we could have or should have reviewed the constitutionality of the proposed amendment prior to it being presented to the voters, but it is not a question the Commonwealth should ask. Throughout this litigation, the Commonwealth has insisted that we cannot lawfully decide this case prior to the referendum. In its motion for a stay in this case, the Commonwealth argued that long-standing Virginia precedent, Scott versus James, was virtually indistinguishable from this case, and that it clearly held that courts cannot interfere to stop any of the proceedings while the permanent law is in the process of being made. And only upon the completion of the proceedings, the validity of the amendment is assailed on the ground that the several provisions of the Constitution have not been complied with. Then the courts can pass upon the validity of the amendment. And here goes the most basic legal language that you're going to hear in all of that, ladies and gentlemen. The Commonwealth concluded that the lesser is clear. Courts may not preemptively invalidate a proposed constitutional amendment before it has been passed by the voters. AOC represents a district in the state of New York, gets in front of cameras, speaks like she knows what she's talking about, and wants to actually run as the next president of the United States, but can't do something as simple as read a document and know what she's actually talking about, ladies and gentlemen. And so as this redistricting war continues, now you have Missouri that has now been approved, ladies and gentlemen, to redraw its maps the way the state Republicans want. And South Carolina is also pushing back as well. But none of that is stopping people like AOC, Hakeem Jeffries, and Cory Booker from running to mainstream media and doing basically the only thing the left knows how to actually do well: cry racism and pretend democracy is being destroyed. Take a listen.
There is so much sacrifice and pain to end the post-Reconstruction period where Southern states used all kind of dirty tricks to effectively eviscerate black representation in Congress. This Supreme Court, whatever you want to say, the legal rationale, which I disagree with, but the actual result is to send us back to an era in the post-Reconstruction period where Southern states effectively stopped black people from having a voice in this democracy, representation in this democracy. This doesn't just hurt the African-American community. I am here right now because people from all backgrounds joined hands, sacrificed and struggled to advance our democracy. People died like Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, black and white, Christian and Jewish, because they understood that this democracy can't be real for some people and out of reach for others. The very principle of fair elections, a sacred aspect of our democracy, has now been eviscerated. And all the blood, all the toil, all the death, all the martyrs, that has been disrespected by a Supreme Court that ultimately has resulted in the painful present now, where communities all over the South who enjoyed fair voting maps and fair voting have now lost that right and that access to our democracy.
The reality is the left is going to keep repeating this message because it's really all they have. They cannot argue the logic or the facts, but what they can do is argue the emotion, how black voters specifically will be the victims. And the reality is their base buys this sort of stuff, and so they keep using it. And so one thing for sure, two things for certain, because we are seeing several southern states being allowed to move forward, this is only going to get worse for the left. Take a listen to this.
The Missouri Supreme Court issued 2 lightning-fast rulings on redistricting this afternoon, both unanimous.
The end result, the mid-decade congressional map remains in place. Fox 4's Missouri Capitol Bureau reporter Mark Zinn has reaction on those closing arguments.
The Missouri Supreme Court hearing testimony Tuesday on 3 separate cases with one similar theme: redistricting. The first 2 cases heard Tuesday, Healy v. Missouri and Weiss v. Missouri, are centered around the new congressional districts themselves, with attorneys making arguments over whether or not the new Missouri 1st congressional map meets the recognized threshold for compactness.
The General Assembly said any citizen after that decision can come to the court and ask for that decision to be reversed.
The council does not understand that the legal standard requires a connected thread between the two.
And this is just the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, because as more states move forward with redistricting and more courts start pushing back against these race-based maps, Democrats are only going to get louder, more desperate, and more dramatic. They're going to double down because they know what the stakes are. But it's only one problem. Voters really don't like them. The party's very unlikable right now, and since they're not in office, they really can't change their image the way Trump could if this conflict in Iran ends, and that affects inflation, gas, etc. And so if Democrats are melting down now, just wait. Because as more states get the green light to redraw their maps and Republicans keep gaining ground, this panic is only going to get worse before it gets better. And the more they scream, the more they expose what this was always all about: control. But those are my thoughts in the update. Now it's time to hear from you. Drop your comment down below. As always, smash that thumbs up if you enjoy the content. Subscribe for more. And as always, until next time.